The autumn evening was drawing to a close as Angela Miller drove home from another exhausting shift at Memorial Hospital. After 12 hours of helping patients in the emergency room, her mind wandered to the simple comfort of her waiting bed. The streetlights were just starting to flicker on, casting long shadows across the familiar roads she'd driven hundreds of times before. That's when she noticed the police cruiser's lights flashing in her rearview mirror. What could this be about? She wondered, automatically checking her speedometer. She hadn't been speeding, and her car registration was up to date. Still, she did everything by the book, signaling as she pulled over to the side of the road, turning off the engine, and placing both hands visible on the steering wheel. Through her side mirror, she watched Officer Thomas step out of his patrol car. Something about his walk, the way he approached her vehicle with his hand already resting on his holster, made her stomach tighten. 10 years of working in the ER had taught her to trust her instincts about people, and right now, those instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. License and registration, he barked before he'd even reached her window fully. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. His tone was harsh, unnecessarily aggressive. "Good evening, officer," Angela replied calmly, her voice steady despite her growing unease. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Officer Thomas's face hardened. "I said, license and registration, now." Angela kept her movements slow and deliberate as she reached for her purse. "I'm going to get my documents from my bag, officer," she said clearly, narrating her actions just as her father had taught her years ago. As an ER nurse, she'd treated enough victims of misunderstandings to know the importance of clear communication. But as she pulled out her wallet, Officer Thomas's demeanor shifted from hostile to dangerous. "Get out of the car," he suddenly demanded, his hand now fully gripping his weapon. "Officer, I don't understand." "I haven't done anything wrong," Angela stated, her medical training kicking in as she fought to keep her voice steady. She'd talked down countless agitated patients in the ER. This wasn't so different. "I'm just trying to show you my license as requested." That's when she remembered her hospital ID badge was still hanging around her neck. "Officer, I'm a nurse at Memorial Hospital. I'm just heading home from my shift. Here's my hospital ID." "I said get out of the car." He was shouting now, and Angela could see a vein pulsing in his neck. His reaction was completely disproportionate to the situation, and she knew this was about to go very wrong. With trembling fingers, she pressed the emergency recording feature on her phone, another habit her father had insisted she learn. As she did so, she noticed movement in her rearview mirror. A red SUV had pulled over about 50 feet behind them, and she could see someone holding up a phone, recording the scene. "I'm going to comply, officer," she announced clearly, her voice carrying for the benefit of any witnesses and recording devices. "But I want to state that I have done nothing wrong, and I'm concerned for my safety." Her heart was pounding, but years of handling crisis situations in the ER had taught her to function through fear. As she reached for her door handle, she silently thanked her younger brother, a civil rights attorney, for drilling her on her rights. She knew she needed to stay calm, document everything, and most importantly, survive this encounter. What she didn't know was that this traffic stop would soon become the catalyst for exposing years of departmental corruption and changing police practices across the city. A passing car slowed down, its headlights illuminating the scene like a spotlight. Angela could feel the weight of multiple witnesses now, and somehow that gave her strength. She wasn't alone in this moment, and she wouldn't let fear silence her. As Officer Thomas's face contorted with barely contained rage, she made a silent promise to herself. This wouldn't be just another incident swept under the rug. This time would be different. And with that thought, she stepped out of her car, not knowing that this moment would spark a movement that would reshape their entire community. The real question wasn't about what would happen next, it was about how many lives would change because she chose to stand her ground that autumn evening. The evening air had grown colder, or maybe it was just fear sending chills down Angela's spine as she stood beside her car. The blue and red lights from the police cruiser painted everything in surreal colors, making the familiar street feel like another world entirely. "Hands where I can see them," Officer Thomas shouted, though Angela's hands were already raised to shoulder height. Her hospital ID badge swayed gently in the breeze, catching the flashing lights. A small reminder of her identity, her profession, everything she'd worked for. "My hands are up, officer," she responded steadily, using the same calm voice she used with distressed patients. "I want to cooperate fully, but I'd like to understand why I've been stopped." Instead of answering, Officer Thomas moved closer, his body language aggressive. "Turn around and face your vehicle." The veins in his neck were more pronounced now, his face flushed with anger that seemed to have no rational source. Angela complied, turning slowly. Through the reflection in her car window, she could see more vehicles had stopped. At least 3 people were recording with their phones now. A city bus had even slowed down, its passengers pressing against the windows to witness the scene unfolding. "Officer, I work at Memorial Hospital. I'm an ER nurse and I—" Her words were cut short as Officer Thomas suddenly grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. The pain shot through her shoulder like lightning. "Stop resisting," he yelled, though she hadn't moved a muscle. "I'm not resisting," Angela managed through gritted teeth, her medical training automatically cataloging the potential damage to her rotator cuff. "You're hurting me, and there are witnesses." She could hear voices now from the gathering crowd. "Hey, she's not doing anything," someone called out. "We're recording everything," shouted another. That's when Angela felt the cold metal of handcuffs against her wrists, the clicks of the cuffs mixing with the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. Years of handling crisis situations in the ER had taught her to stay focused even when everything was chaos around her. Using her hospital's crisis intervention techniques, she started to mentally document everything. The time, visible on the bank sign across the street, 8:47 p.m. The weather, clear, streetlights on. The witnesses, at least 7 visible bystanders, plus the bus. The pain, sharp in her shoulder, radiating down her arm. Through the commotion, she heard a familiar sound, the automated voice of her smartwatch, calling 911. Her brother's insistence on teaching her the emergency features of her devices didn't seem so paranoid now. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Angela Miller," she spoke clearly, turning her head toward her watch. "I'm being detained by Officer Thomas. Badge number visible on his uniform is 8294. I'm a nurse at Memorial Hospital, and I'm concerned for my safety. I'm on Cedar Street near Wilson Avenue. Multiple witnesses are present and recording." Officer Thomas's grip tightened at her words, but Angela kept going. "I've complied with all commands, but I've not been told why I was stopped. My shoulder is being injured, and I'm requesting additional officers and medical attention." The dispatcher's voice came through clearly. "We're sending additional units to your location. Please stay on the line." A new voice cut through the night, firm, female, authoritative. "I'm Dr. Chen from County General." "Officer, that woman is my colleague, and I can see you're causing her injury." A middle-aged Asian woman had stepped forward from the crowd, her own hospital ID visible. "I'm professionally documenting all physical trauma being inflicted right now." The presence of another medical professional seemed to make Officer Thomas hesitate. His grip loosened slightly, though the damage to Angela's shoulder was already done. She could hear more sirens in the distance, growing closer. Through the pain and fear, Angela felt something else growing: determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. She thought about every patient she'd treated who'd been afraid to speak up, every story she'd heard that ended in silence. The growing crowd, the recordings, the witnesses. This time, there would be no sweeping things under the rug. As the new police units arrived, their lights adding to the surreal scene, Angela stood straight despite her restraints. Her shoulder throbbed, but her voice remained steady as she began to clearly state her name, profession, and the sequence of events for the arriving officers. This was just the beginning, and somehow she knew that this moment, this choice to stand firm and speak truth, would ripple out far beyond this street corner. The night was far from over, but neither was her fight for justice. Within minutes, the quiet street had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. 3 additional police cars had arrived, their lights painting the growing crowd in alternating red and blue. Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran officer with salt and pepper hair, took immediate control of the situation. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" he asked, his experienced eyes taking in Angela's hospital ID, the gathered witnesses, and Officer Thomas's aggressive stance. "This officer pulled me over without cause," Angela stated clearly, her voice carrying despite the pain in her shoulder. "I've been fully cooperative, yet I was forcibly removed from my vehicle and injured." Dr. Chen from County General has been witnessing and documenting the interaction. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her phone still recording. "I've been here for the past 10 minutes. As a medical professional, I can confirm that unnecessary force was used, potentially causing rotator cuff damage." The surgeon's expression remained neutral, but his actions were swift. Officer Thomas stepped back. Richards, take his statement over by his cruiser. He turned to Angela, his tone shifting to something more professional. "Ma'am, would you like medical attention?" "Yes," Angela replied, maintaining her composure. "But first, I'd like to state for the record that my phone has been recording since the initial stop, and my smartwatch recorded my 911 call. I'd also like to note the badge numbers of all officers present." A young woman from the crowd called out, "We've got multiple recordings too." He was way out of line. Several others nodded, holding up their phones. The sergeant gestured to another officer. "Walker, please get contact information from all witnesses." He turned back to Angela. "The paramedics are arriving now. Would you like the handcuffs removed for medical examination?" "Please document their removal first," Angela requested, thinking of her brother's legal advice. Her years in the ER had taught her the importance of detailed documentation. As the paramedics approached with their equipment, Angela noticed a familiar face among them, Nurse Thompson from her ER department. The recognition brought an unexpected wave of emotion, but she pushed it down. This wasn't the time for tears. "Hey, it's okay," Thompson said softly, reading her expression. "We're going to document everything properly." She turned to her partner. "Full set of photos before we touch anything, okay?" While the paramedics worked, more details emerged from the crowd. A bus driver had stayed behind to give a statement. A college student mentioned that her dashcam had captured the entire initial stop. An elderly couple had written down detailed notes, including timestamps. "My daughter's pre-law at State University," the elderly woman said, approaching Sergeant Rodriguez. "She says you need to preserve all radio communications and dashcam footage from tonight." Angela smiled slightly, despite her situation. The community wasn't just watching. They were actively involved, informed, and engaged. This wasn't going to be another incident lost in paperwork and procedure. Dr. Chen hadn't left her side, providing a running medical commentary for her recording. Patient shows signs of shoulder strain, possible partial dislocation, bruising already evident on both wrists from over-tightened cuffs. Time is now 9:17 p.m. As the paramedics documented her injuries, Angela overheard snippets of radio conversations. Words like internal affairs and immediate review drifted through the night air. Officer Thomas stood by his cruiser, his earlier aggression replaced by a tense stillness. A local news van pulled up, drawn by the cluster of emergency vehicles. Angela noticed Officer Thomas's face pale slightly at the sight. But it was the arrival of a different vehicle that really caught her attention, a black SUV with city department plates. "That's the police commissioner," she heard one officer whisper to another. Someone called him directly. The commissioner, a tall woman with commanding presence, took in the scene quickly. Her gaze lingered on Angela's hospital ID, the gathered medical professionals, the crowd of witnesses still recording everything. "Full investigation," she announced firmly, her voice carrying across the scene. "I want all footage preserved, all witness statements taken, and all medical documentation collected." She approached Angela, her expression serious but compassionate. "Ms. Miller, I understand you're a nurse at Memorial." "Yes, ma'am." "I'd like you to know that this will be handled properly. We've had previous concerns about Officer Thomas. Your documentation and these witnesses may have just helped us address a larger issue." As Angela was finally cleared to leave with the paramedics for a full hospital evaluation, she looked back at the scene. The street was still lit up like daylight, witnesses were still giving statements, and officers were collecting evidence with unprecedented thoroughness. Something had shifted tonight. This wasn't just about one traffic stop gone wrong. It was about a community standing together, about professionals across different fields supporting each other, about the power of proper documentation and collective action. In the ambulance, as Nurse Thompson gently placed an ice pack on her shoulder, Angela finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. But along with the pain and residual fear came something else: determination. This was just the beginning of a much bigger story. The following week unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated symphony, though Angela hadn't planned it that way. She sat in her brother's law office, surrounded by stacks of papers and a growing digital archive of evidence. Her shoulder was wrapped in a professional sling, a constant reminder of that night, but also fuel for what was coming next. "You did everything right," her brother said, reviewing the footage from her phone for the 100th time. But what's really extraordinary is how the community responded. "Look at this, we've received videos from 12 different angles. The bus company's dashcam footage just came in too." Angela leaned forward, watching the screen. "Have you seen the social media response? That college student's dashcam video has over 2 million views. People are coming forward with their own stories." Her brother nodded, pulling up another file on his computer. "That's actually why I called you in today. We've uncovered something bigger, much bigger." He turned the screen toward her, showing a spreadsheet filled with dates and incident numbers. "These are all complaints filed against Officer Thomas in the last 3 years. Most were buried or dismissed, but they show a clear pattern." "How did you get these?" Angela asked, scanning the dates. "Here's the interesting part. Remember that young officer at the scene, Walker? She came forward yesterday with a flash drive. Apparently, she's been keeping her own records of concerning incidents. She's not the only one either." The office door opened and Lisa Chen, the doctor who had witnessed the incident, walked in. She wasn't alone. 2 more police officers, a civil rights attorney, and surprisingly, the police commissioner herself followed. "Thank you for meeting with us," the commissioner said, taking a seat. "What happened to you, Ms. Miller, was unacceptable. But it's also given us an opportunity to address systemic issues we've been trying to tackle for years." Officer Reynolds, one of the newer officers, spoke up. "There's a group of us who've been documenting problems, trying to report them through proper channels. But the old guard, they have ways of making things disappear." "Not this time," Lisa added firmly. "The medical evidence is irrefutable. I've reviewed cases from 3 different hospitals now. There's a clear pattern of similar injuries from certain officers, particularly during traffic stops." Angela looked at the growing team around her. Each person brought a piece of the puzzle: medical records, internal complaints, witness statements, statistical data. What had started as one terrible traffic stop was expanding into something much more significant. "We need your help," the commissioner said directly to Angela. "Your case is strong on its own, but it could be the key to unlocking everything else. You have medical training, community respect, and most importantly, you followed every procedure perfectly that night. Your documentation is flawless." The civil rights attorney, Ms. Rivera, spread out some papers on the desk. "We're not just filing a complaint. We're building a case for departmental reform. Your incident connects all the dots: excessive force, racial profiling, complaint suppression, and the code of silence." "But it also shows something else," Officer Reynolds added. "It shows how many good cops want change. Your case gives us a platform to finally speak up." Angela studied the documents before her. Hospital records showed a pattern of similar injuries from traffic stops. Internal police reports revealed buried complaints. Social media posts showed countless others who had faced similar situations but hadn't been able to prove their cases. "The media attention helps," her brother said. "But what really matters is the evidence. Every witness that night knew exactly what to document. The community didn't just watch. They got involved. They collected evidence. They stayed to give statements. That's never happened on this scale before." The commissioner leaned forward. "We're preparing to announce a major internal investigation, but we want to do more than just punish bad officers. We want systematic change, new training programs, community oversight, transparent complaint procedures. Your case could be the foundation for all of that." Angela touched her injured shoulder thoughtfully. "What do you need from me?" "Your voice," Ms. Rivera replied. "Your story, your expertise as a medical professional. We need you to help us show that this isn't just about one bad officer or one traffic stop. It's about changing the entire system." The room fell quiet, waiting for her response. Through the office window, Angela could see the hospital where she worked, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. She thought about all the patients she'd treated, all the stories she'd heard, all the times people had been afraid to speak up. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "But I want to be involved in designing the reforms. We need input from medical professionals about de-escalation techniques. We need community involvement in officer training. We need you," the commissioner interrupted gently. "Someone who can bridge the gaps between law enforcement, medical professionals, and the community." As they began to outline their strategy, Angela realized that her brother's office had become something more than a legal workspace. It had become a command center for change, a place where people from different sides of a broken system could come together and finally start fixing things. The evidence was still being gathered, witnesses were still coming forward, and the real work was just beginning. But looking around at this unlikely alliance, doctors, lawyers, police officers, and community activists, Angela knew that something unprecedented was taking shape. This wasn't just about justice for one person anymore. It was about transforming a system that had failed too many for too long. 2 months after the traffic stop, Angela sat in a conference room at City Hall, surrounded by stacks of evidence that seemed to grow taller every day. What had started as one incident had snowballed into something much larger, revealing a pattern that couldn't be ignored. "You need to see this," Officer Walker said, placing a laptop in front of Angela. The young officer had become a key ally, risking her career to expose the truth. "We found more dashcam footage that was supposedly corrupted or lost. The tech team managed to recover it." The footage played silently on the screen, showing similar traffic stops spanning the last 5 years. Each one followed an eerily familiar pattern: unnecessary escalation, excessive force, missing documentation. But what caught Angela's attention wasn't just the incidents themselves, but the faces of other officers in the background, their expressions showing clear discomfort with what they were witnessing. "Look at their body language," Dr. Chen pointed out, leaning in. She'd taken a leave of absence from her hospital duties to help with the investigation. The other officers knew something was wrong, but they felt powerless to stop it. The police commissioner entered the room carrying a thick folder. "We've interviewed 28 officers so far," she said, her face showing the strain of sleepless nights. Many of them had tried to report problems before. The system wasn't just broken, it was designed to silence them. Angela picked up one of the reports, reading between the lines of carefully worded bureaucratic language. They were afraid of retaliation, transferred to undesirable shifts, passed over for promotions, labeled as troublemakers. "But that's not even the worst part," her brother added, spreading out more documents. "Look at these complaint records. When community members tried to report incidents, their complaints were either lost, buried, or turned around on them. Some even faced harassment after filing reports." The door opened again, and Ms. Rivera, the civil rights attorney, rushed in with a USB drive. "You won't believe what just came in. Remember that retired surgeon who reached out last week? He kept his own private records, dates, times, locations, badge numbers. He documented everything for 15 years. The team gathered around the computer as Ms. Rivera pulled up the files. Spreadsheets, photographs, handwritten notes. A decade and a half of meticulously documented incidents that had never seen the light of day. He was waiting, Officer Walker said softly, waiting for a case strong enough to break through the wall of silence, waiting for someone like you, Angela. Angela thought back to the night of her traffic stop, remembering the fear, the anger, the determination. But it wasn't just me, it was everyone. The witnesses who stayed, the doctors who documented, the officers who finally spoke up. We all played a part. The commissioner nodded, pulling up another file on her tablet. And look at what that's led to. Internal Affairs has reopened 37 cases. Officers who were forced out for speaking up are coming forward with their stories. Even retired officers are breaking their silence. The hospital board is involved now too, Dr. Chen added. We're cross-referencing medical records with police reports, looking for patterns of injuries that weren't properly explained. The data tells a story that can't be denied. Officer Walker's phone buzzed with a text message. Her face lit up as she read it. Another officer just agreed to testify. He was Officer Thomas's partner 3 years ago. says he has recordings of conversations that prove the cover-ups went all the way to the top. Angela stood up, walking to the window. From here, she could see the street where it all happened. It looked so ordinary now, just another corner in the city. But that corner had become a tipping point, the place where years of silence finally began to crack. "You know what's really powerful?" Ms. Rivera said, joining her at the window. "It's not just the evidence we're uncovering. It's how the community has stayed involved. Those first witnesses who recorded everything, they started a network. They're teaching people about their rights, how to document incidents, how to support each other." The commissioner's phone rang, and her expression turned serious as she listened. "That was the mayor's office," she said after hanging up. "The FBI just opened an investigation based on our findings. This is going federal." The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. What had started as one traffic stop had grown into something none of them could have imagined. The wall of silence wasn't just cracking, it was crumbling. "We should take a break," Angela's brother suggested, noticing the tired faces around the room. "We've been at this for hours." But Angela shook her head, picking up another file. "Not yet. These aren't just papers we're going through. These are people's lives, their stories. They waited years to be heard. We can't stop now." The team nodded in agreement, turning back to their work. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows through the conference room windows. But inside, light was finally being shed on dark corners that had been hidden for far too long. As Angela opened another file, she realized that this wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a reckoning, a chance to transform a broken system from the inside out. And every piece of evidence they uncovered, every officer who spoke up, every story that finally came to light was another step toward that transformation. The community center buzzed with energy as people filled every available seat. 3 months after the traffic stop incident, what had started as a small gathering had grown into something remarkable. Angela stood at the back of the room, watching as officers in uniform sat next to community members, doctors chatted with civil rights activists, and young people helped elderly residents find comfortable seats. "I never thought I'd see anything like this," Officer Walker whispered, standing beside Angela. "Look at Officer Chen over there, 25 years on the force, and he's finally telling his story about trying to report misconduct back in '98. The elderly officer in question was speaking earnestly to a group of young police academy cadets, his hands moving animatedly as he shared his experiences. The cadets leaned forward, taking notes, asking questions, eager to learn from the past to shape a better future. "Remember that bus driver who stayed to give a statement the night of your incident?" Officer Walker continued. "He started a community watch program. They're not just watching for crime, they're watching out for everyone, including officers who need backup in difficult situations." Angela nodded, remembering how that bus driver had been one of the first witnesses to stop that night. Now his program had spread to every bus route in the city, creating a network of mobile community observers trained in proper documentation and de-escalation techniques. At the front of the room, Dr. Chen was setting up a presentation. "This is the training program we've developed," she explained to the mixed audience. "It combines medical knowledge about stress responses with practical techniques for de-escalation. We're teaching both officers and community members because safety is everyone's responsibility." The doors opened again as more people arrived. The police commissioner entered with several high-ranking officers, followed by city council members and community leaders. But what caught Angela's attention was a group of officers she didn't recognize. "They're from other cities," her brother explained, joining her at the back. "Word's getting out about what we're doing here. They want to learn how to implement similar programs in their own departments." The commissioner took the podium, waiting for the room to settle. 3 months ago, a traffic stop went wrong in our city. But unlike other incidents, this one didn't end in just anger and distrust. Instead, it became a catalyst for real change. She gestured to the diverse crowd. "Look around this room. Police officers and community members working together. Medical professionals helping us understand how to better handle stress and trauma. Young people teaching us about technology and documentation. Retired officers sharing wisdom we should have listened to years ago." Angela moved closer as the commissioner continued. "Last week, our new oversight board handled its first case. The board includes officers, medical professionals, legal experts, and community members. Every voice matters, every perspective counts. And you know what? It worked. The situation was resolved fairly, transparently, and with full accountability. The room erupted in applause, but it wasn't just celebration, it was recognition of hard work beginning to bear fruit. A young activist raised her hand. But what about officers who still resist these changes? We've heard some are pushing back against the new policies. Officer Walker stepped forward to answer. Change isn't easy, and yes, some resist it. But more officers support these reforms than you might think. We became police officers to serve our communities. Now we finally have a system that helps us do that right. The next hour flew by as people shared stories, asked questions, and proposed new ideas. A retired judge offered to help train community members about their legal rights. A tech company executive volunteered to develop an app for secure incident documentation. Medical students proposed rotating internships with the police department to better understand each other's challenges. This is what real community policing looks like, Angela's brother said quietly. Not us versus them, but all of us working together. As the formal meeting ended, people didn't rush to leave. They stayed, forming small groups, exchanging contact information, making plans for future collaboration. A young officer was showing an elderly community member how to use the new incident reporting app. A veteran officer was learning about social media documentation from a teenager. Angela felt a tap on her shoulder. It was the bus driver who'd witnessed her traffic stop. You should see what's happening on the streets, he said proudly. Officers stopping to chat with residents. Kids waving to patrol cars. People looking out for each other. It's like the whole city remembered we're all in this together. The police commissioner joined their conversation. The mayor's office called today. They'd want to make our program a model for other cities. The FBI's Civil Rights Division is interested too. They say they've never seen community engagement quite like this. Looking around the room, Angela saw something she hadn't expected when all this began: hope. Not naive optimism, but real, practical hope built on hard work, honest dialogue, and genuine commitment to change. You know what's really amazing? Officer Walker said, watching the continued interactions. We're not just talking about change anymore. We're not just protesting or complaining. We're actually building something new together. As the evening wound down, Angela helped stack chairs and clean up, just as she had that first night 3 months ago. But now, each chair represented someone willing to be part of the solution, each cleared table made space for next week's meeting, and each conversation planted seeds for further growth. The community center might have seemed ordinary from the outside, but inside, it had become an incubator for transformation, proof that when people choose to stand together, real change isn't just possible, it's unstoppable. 1 year after the traffic stop that changed everything, Angela stood in the newly renovated Police Academy Training Center. The room was filled with a mix of fresh-faced cadets and veteran officers, all gathered for a special training session. But today's lesson wasn't about standard police procedures, it was about transformation. Let me tell you a story, Angela began, touching her shoulder where the injury had long since healed. It's not just my story anymore, it belongs to all of us now. The screen behind her showed statistics that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Excessive force complaints down by 70%, community trust ratings up by 85%, officer job satisfaction improved by 60%. But the numbers didn't tell the whole story. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Angela continued, nodding to Officer Thompson, who stood up from his seat. Would you like to share what happened that day? The veteran officer cleared his throat. I was Officer Thomas's partner for 5 years, he began, his voice steady but emotional. I saw things that weren't right, but I stayed quiet. The night of Ms. Miller's traffic stop, something in me just broke. I couldn't be part of the problem anymore. The room fell silent as Officer Thompson shared his story of finally coming forward, of providing the evidence that broke the case wide open. His testimony had revealed a pattern of misconduct that went back years, but more importantly, it had shown other officers that speaking up wasn't just possible, it was necessary. Change doesn't come from one person, Angela reminded the room. It comes from all of us choosing to do better, to be better. Dr. Chen stepped forward with her presentation clicker. Let's look at how our new training program has evolved, she said, bringing up slides showing the integration of medical knowledge into police training. We're not just teaching officers how to handle confrontation, we're teaching them how to prevent it. The police commissioner, now nationally recognized for leading this reformation, added her perspective. Last month, we had visitors from 12 different cities studying our program. They came expecting to learn about new policies and procedures. Instead, they learned about partnership. She gestured to the wall where photographs told the story of the past year, community meetings, joint training sessions, celebration dinners. This isn't just about policing anymore. It's about building a community where everyone feels safe, respected, and heard. A young cadet raised her hand. But how do you handle the officers who still resist these changes? Officer Walker, now promoted to training supervisor, answered that one. We lead by example. When officers see their colleagues building better relationships with the community, getting more support, and feeling more satisfied with their work, they want to be part of that change. The bus driver who had witnessed the original incident, now head of the Community Safety Partnership, shared his perspective. A year ago, people were afraid to call the police. Now they know every call will be handled with respect and professionalism. That's not just policy change, that's cultural change. Angela's brother, who had helped build the legal framework for the reforms, opened his laptop to share more results. The numbers are important, he said, but look at these testimonials. Officers talking about feeling supported when they report misconduct. Community members describing positive interactions with police. Young people considering careers in law enforcement because they want to be part of this new approach. The afternoon continued with practical demonstrations of new de-escalation techniques, technology tools for transparency, and community engagement strategies. But the most powerful moment came when Officer Thomas's former partner shared body camera footage from a recent traffic stop. Watch how this officer handles the situation, he said, playing the video. Clear communication, respectful interaction, proper documentation. This is what we always should have been doing. This is what we can all do now. As the session wound down, Angela looked around the room at the faces of officers both new and experienced. She saw determination there and something else, pride. Not the kind of pride that comes from power, but the pride that comes from being part of positive change. 1 year ago, I was just an ER nurse who got pulled over, she concluded. Today, I'm part of something much bigger. We all are. And the work isn't finished, it's just beginning. The police commissioner stood for the final words. Next month, we're hosting the first national conference on community-centered policing. Departments from across the country will be here to learn from our experience. But you know what they'll learn first? That real change happens when we stop seeing each other as adversaries and start seeing each other as partners. As the room cleared out, Angela stayed behind, watching officers and community members chatting, exchanging contact information, making plans for future collaborations. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined this scene. Now, she couldn't imagine their city any other way. The elderly couple who had witnessed her traffic stop, now regular volunteers at the community center, stopped to say goodbye. You know what's different now? The wife asked. It's not just that things have changed, it's that we all believe they'll keep changing for the better. Outside, the sun was setting over the city. From the academy's windows, Angela could see patrol cars moving through the streets, officers walking their beats, community members going about their day. But now, these everyday scenes carried new meaning. They were pictures of possibility, snapshots of what could happen when people chose to stand together for change. This wasn't just a story about justice anymore. It was a story about transformation, about what happens when one moment of courage ripples out to touch countless lives. And somewhere in the city, another traffic stop was happening. But this time, it would be different. This time, it would be right.